Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Matty here, and it is Tuesday today, so we are going to be doing our tier list, our meta deck tier list. This is week 2 of the ED Crisis format, so things have changed a little bit from last week. Definitely the results from this past weekend's Ursa Days tournament have definitely raised a little bit of questions or red flags in terms of, what decks are kind of, doing well, not doing well, which decks are well positioned, which aren't. We did spend a lot of time yesterday in our meta report going over the specific decks that, of course, placed really well, and we kind of went in depth in talking about them. In this video, we're going to be, of course, ranking all of the decks in the metagame. We have 25 of what I believe are the most relevant decks in the current format. Again, like I said, we spent a lot of time talking about these decks yesterday, so we're not going to go like super in depth when we're discussing these decks. We've definitely talked about them quite a bit already on the channel, so we're just going to be ranking them based off of where I believe they're positioned in the metagame right now. This is going to be a tier list that is both for, tournament play, but also in ranked battles, just sort of an overall cumulative, tier list about how I kind of position the decks currently in the format. Inherently some decks are stronger than others, right? But depending on what other decks are seeing play, what the matchup datas look like, it really kind of depends in terms of, what I really believe, which decks, do well currently in the current meta landscape. So we're going to dive right into it, guys. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tons of content coming. In fact, I believe the next mini set is going to be dropping in like 13 days, and that should be announced in like 6 or 7 days. So a lot of stuff is going to be coming here on the channel. We're going to get some more gameplay going as well. But anyway, week 2 tier list. Yeah, let's just kind of dive right into it. So first off, we have Dark Arceus, or Arceus Crobat, which is predominantly right now played with Giratina as well. Saw a little bit of play at the end of last format, seen a little bit of play this format as well. Currently the 13th most played deck in this format so far, if you look at the entire format overall, but I would say that it's seen a little bit more play in the last couple of weeks than it did at the beginning of the week. Definitely still a strong deck. This is kind of the same thing as last week. It always has a really decent win rate. This is a kind of what we consider kind of, an Exodia deck, or kind of a deck that just sort of, does its thing, whether you draw your cards or you don't, you either win or lose, right? It's not necessarily a deck that's well positioned or not well positioned, depending on the matchups in the format. If you get all of your Pokemon out, this combo can do up to 180 damage, which is enough to KO basically every Pokemon in the game. It can be a little bit inconsistent inherently, but it's just a bunch of really strong Pokemon all thrown together. Yes, technically with Crobat, we do have a cover for Oricorio. We have Giratina and Darkrai. We've got Arceus, so it's pretty decent. I'm not going to lie. Really, the Arceus Giratina core is quite interesting in its own right. I think there's actually a lot of potential there with Dawn just to attack maybe a turn earlier with Arceus. I really like this deck. We're going to go ahead and just kind of keep this in the A tier. Again, this is a deck that just doesn't see a ton of play, so it's hard for us to really quantify it. But again, the 13th or 14th most played deck of the format right now, but it has a 53% win rate, right? So in a total of about 500 games, it has about a 53% win rate. Again, just a deck that always does fairly well, but is not really something that's caught on. Arceus itself is a decent card, and Arceus Crobat is a decent combo. You pair it with Darkrai Giratina, you just have a bunch of strong Pokemon that can probably do something, so it always has a chance to win, and I don't think that the way that the metagame and the format has changed over the last few days has really changed that. So we're going to keep it right there into the A tier. It'll probably be sort of a mid to low A tier deck, just because it hasn't seen that much play. But I do actually quite like this deck still in the format. Next up, we've got Oricorio and Magnezone, which hasn't seen a ton of play this format. Definitely declining. I think that Oricorio has become a little bit more popular, but I think most people are playing it with Silvally. I think that Silvally is probably the best partner for Oricorio. I know that Oricorio and Magnezone plays 2 copies of Oricorio, but with Silvally in the format, it's just tough to play Oricorio and Magnezone because really you don't have anything early in the game other than Oricorio, which is just going to get absolutely bodied by Silvally. So many Silvally decks are running around. Yes, Magnezone technically is a good matchup for or against Silvally, but no guarantee that we're going to get our Magnezones out that early. So I think in a format dominated by Silvally, this isn't really an option that I would consider super heavily. The 15th most played deck so far of this format, about a 51% win rate, which is actually quite interesting and impressive, I might say. But anyway, because it really hasn't done much and hasn't seen a ton of play, I'm going to go ahead and put it in the B tier. It's similar to Dark Arceus, but I just don't love Oricorio in general right now in the format, unless it's kind of paired with Silvally, because it gets countered so heavily by Silvally. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and put it in the B tier. That's going to be like a high B tier deck in my mind. We're going to try to keep everything in order today, but again, 25 decks, it's going to be a little bit difficult to go ahead and do that. We'll try our best. Next up is going to be Giratina and Darkrai. So yeah, Giratina Darkrai is still a decent deck. It's actually been going up up in play, but also up in win rate over the last week or two. And that's kind of scary if you think about it. I think a lot of people are playing it with just sort of the core Giratina Darkrai, no tech inclusions, no poison like Nihilego, and they're kind of just playing it with like maximum hand disruption and some healing cards, and I do think that's kind of the proper way to play it, at least from a tournament perspective. That's the list that's been winning the most. That's probably what we're going to pull up on the screen. However, I think if you're playing in the ranked ladder or if you're in high Master Ball tier, you might elect to play some Poison Barbs and Nihilego just to kind of cover the Oricorio matchup in case you do run into it. This is a deck list that will lose to Oricorio, even though I wouldn't say Oricorio is that common in the format right now. If you take a look at all of the decks at the top of the meta, it really is a deck that doesn't really care what it goes up against. Sure, it's going to struggle maybe a little bit against Charizard and its ability to get one hit KO'd by Charizard. Of course, there is also Buzzwole that can KO Darkrai in one hit for weakness, so you got to keep that in mind. Overall, I think this is still a really, really strong deck list. I know some people might put this in the S tier. You definitely could make a case to put this deck into the S tier, but this week we're going to be a little bit more selective. I believe I put 3 decks in the S tier last week. This week, I don't think we really have that clear of an S tier deck. I mean, I think we probably do, but I'm not going to put a bunch of decks in the S tier. Giratina Darkrai to me is right on the edge of like an S tier choice, but we're going to be a little bit more picky or choosy this week. Those are funny words. Picky or choosy. We're going to be a little bit more selective, is I guess the term, with which decks we're going to be ranking up into the S tier. So Giratina and Darkrai, still really strong. The 4th most played deck of the format, 51% win rate so far. Really, really strong. I'm going to put it right here in A tier, and it's probably going to be at the very, very top of A tier amongst the other really, really strong decks of the format. Next up, we've got the Buzzwole deck. So because, you know, Buzzwole to me, I think the core Buzzwole package, the Grass Ultra Beast package, and I've been saying this over the last few weeks, is certainly, in my mind, the best deck in the game. Whether you're playing, you know, Buzzwole with 2 Pheromosa and 2 Cyrus, or maybe we're electing to play it with maybe Kartana and some other more tech inclusions, maybe some hand disruption, things like that. I would recommend playing 2 Lusamine, however, some decks don't. If we take a look at the standings from this weekend from the Ursa Days tournament, the 2nd and 3rd place deck were both Buzzwole decks. Now, this is going to be a tier list that's not, again, directly based on the results from the Ursa Days tournament. So we're kind of looking at everything as like a total sort of grasp right now of the format. Fire is definitely becoming more and more common. We did see Charizard Silvally win the Ursa Days tournament this past weekend, and of course, a really good tech inclusion. Even though Charizard Silvally kind of struggled throughout that entire tournament, it just got a little bit fortunate. That player definitely got a bit fortunate in the deck lists that it ended up going up against in day 2, and that's really all it takes, right, to win a tournament, is to get a little bit fortunate and to hit the right matchups. Charizard Silvally certainly good against Buzzwole, but you know, one thing I will say is that Charizard decks and really all of the fire decks in the format right now, whether it's Charizard Silvally, whether it's Charizard Incineroar, or whether it's Blacephalon and Silvally, those are all decks that are on the tier list. Those are inherently inconsistent decks, and one thing I will say about Buzzwole is that it's not inconsistent really at all. In fact, it really is one of the most consistent, flexible decks in the game. A big reason why I believe Buzzwole is still the best deck in Pokemon Pocket right now. But here's the thing, I've been a little bit, I guess, biased towards playing Buzzwole with sort of the Kartana package. I have it split up into 2 categories here. It does split it up into 2 archetypes on Limitless. So this first one here is Buzzwole and Pheromosa. So again, most of the people playing this particular version of Buzzwole are just playing 2 Pheromosa, 2 Cyrus, and they're not really playing Kartana. They're probably not playing maybe some other inclusions, like some tech supporters in here, right? Because they're maybe a little bit more, you know, streamlined in terms of its approach. I do think Buzzwole Pheromosa is really, really strong, but there's too many times, especially against a lot of these stage 2 decks, where not having Kartana does feel like we're not really having enough pressure on that active Pokemon, especially with Lilies and these Solgaleos and the Charizards in the format right now. I just don't think that not playing Kartana is like super safe right now. There's a lot of healing as well, a lot of giant capes and leaf capes. So Pheromosa, in my mind, is probably like the best strategy, but there's too much healing, too much high HP Pokemon that are in the format right now. Buzzwole and Pheromosa to me is still a top deck of the format, and yes, it did get 2nd place, whereas Kartana technically got 3rd place of the tournament, but I'm not really putting too much weight into that. If we took a look at the results, Buzzwole and Pheromosa was the most played deck in the Ursa Days tournament, but actually struggled from a win rate perspective. It had about a 47 or 48% win rate. It definitely kind of struggled against a lot of the fire decks that saw play, as well as Solgaleo. Solgaleo is certainly something that kind of does hard counter Buzzwole to some extent. So Buzzwole Pheromosa to me is still a top deck, but we're going to go ahead, put it high A tier, but I'm going to actually put it behind Giratina and Darkrai. I think that it's fallen a little bit. I think a lot of the meta counters that are kind of seeing play that are strong against Buzzwole are particularly strong against Buzzwole and Pheromosa without that extra pressure that we're getting from things like Kartana and maybe pairing that with Rocky Helmet. That's a lot of extra damage for Buzzwole to come in and finish the KO. So since we're not playing that, I think that we're more hard countered a little bit easier. Particularly the mirror matchup, Pheromosa might be a bit better than the Kartana in the head-to-head, but Pheromosa to me is still a really, really strong deck. I think it's probably Buzzwole Pheromosa, probably a top 3, top 4 deck of the format, but we're not going to be putting it in the S tier. We're going to be putting it right here, high A tier, right behind Giratina and Darkrai. Like I said, I think that Giratina Darkrai is going to be like at the very, very top of A tier. But now we're going to be going into Buzzwole and Kartana. Specifically, in my mind, I'm talking about the version that got 3rd place at the Ursa Days tournament. This is playing like 2 Kartana, 1 Pheromosa, 1 Sabrina, 1 Cyrus, some Erica, some Lucamine, some Rocky Helmets, really everything. This deck list kind of incorporates everything that you could possibly include with Buzzwole. And I think that this deck list is honestly perfect. If I had to play any deck, it would be this 3rd place deck from the Ursa Days tournament from this past week. I know it got 3rd place, it didn't get 2nd, it didn't get 1st, but if we take a look at the metadata in the win rates from that 1,000-player tournament this weekend, Buzzwole and Kartana, or Buzzwole and Celesteela as Limitless categorizes it, actually had quite a bit of a higher win rate than Buzzwole and Pheromosa. It saw less play for sure, so that definitely skews the data a little bit, but had a much better overall, I guess, sort of time in the tournament and against the entire field throughout day 1 than Buzzwole and Pheromosa did. So again, we do definitely look at the final standings of tournaments, but that doesn't tell the whole story. So Buzzwole, Kartana, particularly the list that I'm probably going to put up on the screen here, showcasing to you guys, in my mind, is like the best deck in the game. I know that Charizard won the tournament and Fire is definitely on the rise right now, but those decks are inherently inconsistent. Buzzwole, Kartana is both consistent. You have early pressure. We have Sabrina. It kind of just has everything going for it. It's a list that I believe is really the top deck of the game right now. So yes, it might be a little bit strange to hear that, but the 3rd place deck from Ursa Days is, in my mind, the best deck in the game and the best sort of list that I would be playing right now in the format. I know that there's a lot of counters right now, but there's so many decks that aren't necessarily counters to, to Buzzwole, right? There's still all the Silvally decks running around. There's still Giratina Darkrai. There's still Guzzlord decks running around, Dark Arceus decks, Oricorio decks. There's so much stuff in the format that you're going to end up playing, whether that is in like day 1 of a tournament or it is in ranked battles. No matter what rank you're in, this is the deck list that I would choose to play. And in my mind, I think it's the best deck in Pokemon Pocket. So we're going to be going ahead and putting Buzzwole and Kartana in the S tier. And I believe this was the top deck of last week's tier list as well. But I still believe it to be the case. I think it's been updated a little bit. The list that we're showing on the screen is certainly an updated deck list. But this deck has everything in my mind. So yes, there's going to be some tough matchups for sure. There's definitely, it's not the perfect deck in terms of its positioning. There are some decks in the format that are going to beat it. But I do really think that this is a top deck in the entire metagame right now. So that's why we're putting it in the S tier. So Buzzwole and Kartana, very, very, very strong in my mind, at the very, very top of our list. So an early S tier selection for us. But yeah, Buzzwole, Kartana, just absolutely, absolutely goated. Next up, we've got Gallade and Rampardos. So this is, I believe, one of 2 Gallade lists. I think that's on the tier list. Now, Gallade Rampardos really hasn't seen much play. So this is something that I could have easily thrown off the tier list. But again, we wanted to kind of even number it, put it to 25. Definitely fallen off in play. Honestly, seeing less play than like Gallade and Stoutland, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, Gallade Rampardos certainly isn't the best way to play Rampardos right now. We still have Garchomp. We still have Silvally. I think Rampardos is really strong, but I think the meta is certainly formulated around counterplaying Rampardos or playing things that are a little bit stronger against Rampardos. Buzzwole is still very common. The upside to Gallade, of course, is that it's not weak to grass, and Buzzwole is very common in the format. But the thing with Gallade is that it's inherently not that great of a Pokemon. And this deck is playing all Stage 2 Pokemon, which doesn't feel as good as maybe Garchomp, because Garchomp can attack for 1 energy, so if you do end up getting that Garchomp out early, it feels a little bit less bad. Now, Garchomp, of course, isn't seeing that much play, but neither is Gallade, so, this is a deck that probably will fall off the tier list in the subsequent weeks here as we sort of streamline which decks we're going to be, ranking, but I think Gallade Rampardos, honestly, could be like C or D tier. It's really hard to justify. I think if we're taking a look at its average win rate, not only being like not played really much at all, but also having a pretty terrible win rate, about a 42%. I think we got to go ahead and put it in the D tier. I know some people are going to be interested in Gallade Rampardos in terms of just sort of, maybe playing it in the last couple of formats. Not something I would choose to be playing right now in my, in my direct opinion personally. Okay, so hold on. I got to pull up some more data so we can, so I have something at least to base things off of, I would say. Leah, give me 1 second. So next up is going to be, what do we got to look at? We've got Solgaleo and Shiinotic. And, you know, this is a very, very interesting deck, actually, now that I think about it. You know, Solgaleo Shiinotic is something that I think is a little bit also independent from a lot of the other decks that are seeing play in the format. There's so many times where you're playing this deck that it just doesn't matter what you do or what happens. Your opponent just goes turn 2, going second Solgaleo, and they just start hitting you for 120. They've got the Shiinotic on the bench. They're just milling through their deck. They're getting their second Solgaleo set up. Realistically, if this deck draws well, it's probably going to win. There are some decks that can kind of counter it. Buzzwole definitely has the ability to win this matchup, but it's never really great. Going through 2 Solgaleos with a Lele is quite frankly very, very terrible. Charizard is something that can at least take the KO on Solgaleo, which is somewhat relevant. But in general, I would say that Solgaleo has a pretty dominant matchup against 2 of the most common decks of the format, although struggles against a lot of the other stuff in the format and struggles with its inherent inconsistencies that a lot of these stage 2 rare candy decks do. Now, we do have Shiinotic to bypass that, so it does make it a little bit more consistent than things like, you know, Charizard, but in general, Charizard does win that head-to-head, so it's a little bit tough in general, or it also loses to Oricorio, and that, in my mind, is the one thing holding Solgaleo back. Now, we did put Solgaleo in the S tier, and you could make a very, very decent, or I guess, proposition as to putting Solgaleo in the S tier, but we're not going to do that this week. In fact, Solgaleo, in my mind, is actually a little bit less of a proper choice than it was maybe earlier last week. It did do well in both tournaments. I believe if we take a look at the standings from this past weekend, Solgaleo got both 6th and 7th place, which is actually pretty impressive for the second most played deck of that particular tournament. And it did have a 52% win rate throughout that entire weekend tournament this past weekend, which is very impressive, to be fair, for the second most played deck. But one thing I will say about Solgaleo is that I think that the way that the format is going right now, a little bit more Oricorio seeing play, especially high in Master Ball tier, a little bit more fire decks have becoming a little bit more common. That to me kind of makes me want to just move Solgaleo just a bit down from the old S tier position. We're going to put it right at the top of A tier. I don't know exactly where. It could go... Man, it's an interesting choice, in fact. I'm actually going to put it right here above Buzzwole. Now, one thing I will say about the tier list is that the A tier is going to be pretty filled. I think there's a lot of really strong A tier decks. It really is subjective on how you kind of look at, you know, the format and how you're sort of categorizing S and A tier. In my mind, like, S tier really is reserved for the decks that I think have a massive advantage across most of the format. Buzzwole Kartana to me is just the best deck in the game, so it's going to go in the S tier. But these decks here in A tier so far are all phenomenal decks that I would not be surprised if like somebody was like top of you know, Master Ball rank playing these decks or won the next Ursa Days tournament. They're really, really strong decks. So they could definitely win tournaments at any point in time. B tier is certainly the decks that I think I would be surprised to see them win. But anyway, A tier, don't get disrespected by it. I think a lot of decks are going to be in A tier because there's a lot of really strong decks in the current format, and I think that that is something that I kind of want to stress right now, right? Is there's going to be a lot of these decks in A tier. I think they're all pretty decent. Okay. Anyway, yeah, Solgaleo Shiinotic, definitely kind of a high A tier deck. I think still a top 4, top 5 deck of the format. Next up, we've got Decidueye and Pheromosa. So Decidueye has certainly seen a bit of decline in play over the last few weeks. It saw more play early on in the format, but was certainly a deck that just struggled throughout the field. There's just a better grass-type deck option, and of course, Fire is still very common. Charizard one-hit KOs Decidueye. Yes, we have Leaf Cape and whatnot, but you're going to struggle against a lot of the other Stage 2 archetypes. Decidueye is a really, really cool Pokemon, but just kind of doesn't hang very well against a lot of the best decks of the format right now. Also, Pheromosa is something that can still be countered pretty heavily by Oricorio with like a Shaman or, you know, some healing cards. So again, it's a decent deck, but I just can't really consider it to be like really in the metagame. So far of this entire format, it is the 10th most played deck, but has struggled a little bit, has declined in play over the last week or so, about a 47% win rate. This is a deck that we could put C tier or B tier. I don't know exactly where I want to put it yet. I think B tier might be correct. Probably low, like a middle to low B tier for Decidueye. I think it's okay, but I would be absolutely shocked to see Decidueye win a tournament. In fact, I just don't think it ever could. But that doesn't mean it's a terrible deck. Certainly a deck you could go to Master Ball rank in, but once you kind of get into Master Ball rank, you probably will struggle if you're playing Decidueye and Pheromosa. But, you know, to get to Master Ball, you only need like a 45% win rate. So, yeah, we're going to put it right there into the B tier for now. And next up, we got Gengar. So Gengar is still seeing some play. It actually did fairly well. I believe somebody went like 6-2 at Ursa Days with Gengar this weekend. I think it's kind of a meme deck still. I don't think it's like absolutely dreadful. If you take a look at the decks in the format, things like Buzzwole, like Silvally decks, like Charizard decks, they all kind of do rely pretty heavily on supporter cards. And for that reason, of course, Gengar, whether it's the Bother Gengar or Gengar EX, does turn off supporter cards. Unfortunately, both of these Pokemon, although their effects are strong, and of course we have Rare Candy so we can get into them a bit more quickly, they just inherently are very weak. They just don't do enough damage. Gengar literally 3-hit KOs a Buzzwole with Erika's and Leaf Cape, which is ridiculous, right? So it just doesn't do enough damage, and it's just not consistent enough, even though it does turn off supporter cards. Like, to be fair, you're probably losing to most decks even with that effect in play. In fact, on stream the other day, like, I was playing Buzzwole, and we were playing against, like, this Exodia Gengar deck that was playing like Dusk Noir and like Shiinotic or whatever, and it was crazy, and they got the full board state set up. They drew very well, but they just couldn't win the game because we just did too much damage. We just out-damaged them, which was just kind of ridiculous. So Gengar, kind of a meme. We're going to put it right here into the C tier. I think it does have some merit in terms of like its positioning in the format. It could honestly just be a D tier deck, but we're going to give it like the nod a little bit. We have to also put some decks in the C tier. C tier is like traditionally the most awkward tier because it's like, you know, this is a deck that like maybe still some people will play. Like I would really suggest you don't play Gengar, but it's not at least absolutely dreadful in terms of like its performances, like Gallade has been. So we'll go ahead. We're gonna put it in the C tier. Honestly, could be a D tier deck, but we're gonna give it the nod this week. No, you're not gonna put too much stock into that personally. This is kind of what I'm thinking here. Okay, so next up we've got Tapu, Lele, and Stoutland. This is played with Psychic Energies and Giratina. This is an interesting list. I think this is kind of the new kind of fringe meta choice of like the meme deck of the past week. It was Gallade Stoutland. Stoutland in general is definitely a very memey deck. Not something that I would really consider to be good by any stretch of the imagination. However, in the Ursa Days tournament, there was 4 people playing this deck, and it had about a 50% win rate across those 4 people. And one of those players went 6-2 and did get 43rd place. So they did make day 2 playing Stoutland and Tapu Lele. So, you know, we had to include it on the tier list. It does have some synergies. You know, Giratina Tapu Lele is at least a decent combination. Unfortunately, Silvally definitely has turned off Tapu Lele from this format just because it can't hang with Silvally. It can't just sit in the active spot. You're going to get deleted by turn 2. Even though there is some inherent, I guess, like synergies between Stoutland, but of course we definitely need that rare candy to get into Stoutland, and then even if we do, we're still just kind of reliant on Giratina taking most KOs. So I don't love this deck. Again, it is kind of a meme deck, you know, I think the one placement this week at Ursa Days does at least tell me that this deck can win games. You just have to get a bit lucky in your matchups and whatnot. We're going to put Stoutland again, also probably just in the C tier. C tier is going to be like the meta, and then D tier is kind of just going to be the trash tier, unfortunately. But yeah, let's go ahead. Give it, again, the nod this week. We're going to go ahead and put it in the C tier. Not good, not great, quite bad probably, but you know what? You know, if we're putting it on the tier list, we got to put it on the tier list for a reason, right? So there you go. Okay, so next up we have Silvally and Rampardos. So this is going to be something that I think a lot of people are going to be very interested to hear from me. I believe Stoutland and Rampardos was the most played deck last format, but kind of struggled, especially in day 2, just because the entire format, at least at the top of the metagame, was definitely formulated around beating Silvally Rampardos because it was the most played deck immediately when this format released. And I think that Silvally Rampardos is a phenomenal deck list. I think it's very consistent. I think it's very strong. But unfortunately, you know, people kind of caught on, and everybody now is sort of thinking about this deck as they play it. Definitely fallen off in play. This was the 3rd most played deck of the Ursa Days tournament, was still about 11.5% of the meta share this weekend, but only had a 45% win rate, which is a massive, massive drop off. So the way I'm thinking about it, you know, Silvally Rampardos still seeing a lot of play. It'll continue to decline in play because its positioning in the format will continue to decline. Tons of Buzzwole, you know, tons of Giratina, tons of Charizard decks, tons of Guzzlord decks, tons of Solgaleo decks. Every deck that people are playing really at the top of the metagame is kind of based around its matchups against Silvally Rampardos. So the positioning of this deck list is still quite poor, and I think it'll only continue to get worse, honestly. Not that this deck list isn't good, I just think that it has a horrible position in the format now, considering that basically all of the top decks that are seeing play right now were kind of built in mind to counter Silvally Rampardos, so it's definitely on, you know, kind of the bad side of things as far as like, you know, choosing which decks people play. we're going to go ahead and put it in the B tier. This is a B tier deck. I would be shocked. I would legitimately be shocked if Silvally Rampardos won the next Ursa Days tournament. I believe its highest placement this week was 9th place, and then the next highest placing was like 20th. So it definitely struggled, even though it was the 3rd most played deck of the tournament. Again, 45% win rate, just a massive struggle for Silvally Rampardos. A really, really strong deck that just unfortunately caught everybody's attention, and then everybody sort of decided to counterplay it. So that's kind of why Silvally Rampardos is going in the B tier this week. Was A tier last week, but things, again, definitely on the decline for Silvally Rampardos. Because it's inherently really strong, it'll probably be at the top of B tier, but I really cannot put Silvally Rampardos right now into the A tier. So we're not going to. People might disagree with that, but honestly, the data shows us that it's really not a great choice in the current format right now. What do you have? What is this? Garchomp. Okay. So yeah, Garchomp is also a bit of an awkward one. I think that Garchomp just really struggles in a format that's heavily dominated by grass-type decks. Even though inherently Garchomp is a really strong Pokemon, and it does do well against Silvally, particularly Silvally Rampardos, and we do it for weakness on Silvally. I just don't think Garchomp is something I would choose to play. Again, just too much grass, too much Giratina Darkrai. We have Solgaleo, we have Charizard, so a lot of things that are stage 2 rare candy decks that I would probably rather play than Garchomp. I feel very similarly about Garchomp in terms of, like its positioning. It's very similar to Decidueye, but because Decidueye is a grass type, and I think that it actually has like a little bit of a better time in the format than Garchomp is. Garchomp's going to go like high C tier. It is kind of becoming a bit of a meme. If we take a look at the overall sort of meta share for Garchomp, it is, let's see, can we pull this up here? It's the 23rd most played deck of the format and a 45% win rate. That hasn't really gone up or down since last week. I forget what we tiered Garchomp. We might have put it in the B tier last week. I don't think it's very good. Definitely actually probably worse than it was in previous weeks because less people are playing Silvally Rampardos. So we're going to go ahead and put it in the C tier. And I think that's probably why it might have moved down over the last week or so. But that's definitely kind of how I feel. I'm not going to lie. Shout out to Garchomp, but yeah, it's just not it right now. I don't really have anything else to say about Garchomp, unfortunately. Next up is going to be Greninja and Oricorio, which is, a deck list that's kind of been floating around for quite some time. 20 people played it in the Ursa Days tournament for about a 50% win rate exactly. For the format overall, it is also still the 20th most played deck. Its win rate across this entire format is about 51%, which is fairly respectable. I would be shocked to see this deck win a tournament, but I don't think it's a bad deck whatsoever. So I'm going to go ahead and put Greninja Oricorio into the high B tier. I think I'm going to put it at the top of B tier right now. Again, Oricorio is a bit of a struggle right now. A lot of people are playing this with like still Giratina, maybe the like a Pukey Mewtwo in there thrown in. It really kind of depends on whether or not we draw into our Cyruses or we get our Greninja out early enough. Oricorio definitely can win matchups against some of the best decks in the game right now, but, Solgaleo is really the one deck that gets kind of hard countered by Oricorio, and Giratina Darkrai definitely to some extent. But Charizard is now kind of playing Silvally more commonly, so that matchup still probably isn't very good for you. Yeah, it's still a little bit awkward. I'm not fully invested in the Oricorio strategy. In fact, the best Oricorio deck in my mind in the game right now is only playing one copy of Oricorio, which we'll talk about next. But Greninja and Oricorio, certainly not a bad deck list because it hasn't seen that much play. It hasn't seen a ton of success over the last week or two. I think it has to stay in the B tier. I think it's definitely high B tier. Just hasn't seen enough play or enough success for me to really justify putting it in the A tier. But honestly, this is a deck that you could probably pull into Master Ball rank and do quite well, depending on which decks are seeing play at any given time. Definitely a quality deck list. It's tried and tested. It's proven. It's just not something I think will really catch on too phenomenally right now. So yeah, high B tier it is for Greninja and Oricorio. Next up, we've got Silvally and Zeraora. This is something that I think a lot of people are going to be maybe a bit confused by. But here's the thing. Silvally and Zeraora on Limitless is actually split up into two different archetypes. However, you'll notice that we really only have one, picture of this for the tier list, and that's because I really am condensing them. But one thing I will say, and people have asked me about this before, playing Silvally and Oricorio or Silvally and Zeraora really depends on how many copies of Oricorio you're playing. So basically, there's two versions of this deck. One of them is playing the 2/2 Silvally line, 2 Zeraora, or maybe 1 Zeraora, and then 2 Oricorio. So we're going to call that Silvally and Oricorio. That deck list is totally fine. It's about a 50% win rate deck, but is not nearly as good as just playing 1 Oricorio and then 2 Zeraora. And some people might find that to be quite interesting, but again, tons of Silvally in the format. Oricorio as a leadoff Pokemon is quite terrible. There's so many scenarios where that card is not going to be doing anything for you, and it's just going to be getting KO'd, especially since most of the decks you're going up against are going to be leading off with a Silvally. It's not something that you really want. So I think this deck list really likes 2 copies of Zeraora and 2 copies of Silvally. And Zeraora here can be used as an attacking option, but really the upside to Zeraora is to use it as like a mana, or not a mana, but an energy battery for a later in the game Dawn play to just set up a Silvally or an Oricorio in like one single turn. Or if we do lead off with Zeraora, it's going to get that energy for free, which effectively makes it a free pivot Pokemon, which more consistently allows you to go into Silvally basically for free and then, you know, do Silvally strats. So I'm kind of affectionately referring to this deck as like Turbo Silvally. And then the 1 copy of Oricorio really is for the late game. Again, in the Charizard Silvally Mirror match, you can kind of win the Silvally Mirror, and then they're just left with the Charizard, and then Oricorio can kind of carry. And that's the case against Solgaleo. You can literally just use your Oricorio to win that matchup. Against Giratina Darkrai, you can win that matchup. It can even be quite good against Buzzwole. However, I do think Buzzwole's probably one of the lists that kind of counters Zeraora and Silvally. But in general, I think that even though we only have 1 image of this deck on the tier list, I'm kind of categorizing this deck as not Silvally and Oricorio, but Silvally and Zeraora. So the list that we're going to be showing, 2 Silvally line, 2 Zeraora, 1 Oricorio. And I believe that's how people should be playing this deck. And if you do play this deck this way, in my mind, this is one of the best decks in the entire game. It had a 56.5% win rate, which was the highest actually out of any deck in the Ursa Days tournament. 28 people played it, went 87 and 65. I believe it was 5th or 6th in the standings here. It was actually 4th. So this deck list got 4th at the Ursa Days tournament, even though it was only 2.5 or 3% of the meta share. Very, very high win rate. Just makes basically this deck kind of boils down to a super fast-paced, consistent, really aggressive Silvally strategy that just plays 1 copy of Oricorio because we're playing electric energies anyway. And that honestly makes this deck really, really strong. So against a lot of the other Silvally decks, we should be much more consistent, much more fast pace. That definitely should allow you to win the head-to-head against other Silvally decks, and then the Oricorio was just there to really help you win some of those other matchups against EX decks, which are still very common in the format. This deck list is phenomenal. I really think that more people should play it. I did play it on stream, even though I probably misplayed with it a little bit. We went 50% in like a middle to high Master Ball tier, and I think the deck is really, really strong, especially in tournaments. I think that this is a really, really great choice. So like I said, 1 image for this deck, only 1 categorization of this deck for the tier list today. But if you're playing this deck, play 2 Silvally, 2 Zeraora, and only 1 Oricorio, and just focus yourself around being a Silvally deck that has 1 copy of Oricorio for the late game to potentially kind of checkmate your opponent. This deck list here, and this is going to be kind of a surprise, this might be a spicy take for you guys, is going to be the other S tier deck on today's tier list. Again, something that's going to surprise you guys. We don't often put a deck this low from the meta share in S tier, but I really do think that this is an S tier choice. Just a phenomenal deck that's really well positioned in the metagame right now, and it is just Turbo Silvally. And in my mind, it is probably the best way to utilize and maximize Silvally, which in my mind is probably the best, if not one of the best Pokemon in the entire game. So Silvally, Turbo Silvally with Zeraora is going into the S tier this week. This is a deck that deserves to see more play, and I think is actually quite well positioned in the format right now. That's really all I have to say about it. So yeah, comment below what you guys think of me putting it in the S tier. Kind of a spicy take, but you know what? That's what we do here on the tier list, right? We surprise people. Spicy takes. Okay. Meowscarada and Decidueye. Now, this is a funny one. Again, a deck that really didn't see much play at all. Only 3 people out of like 1,000 people played this deck at the Ursa Days tournament, even though it did go 10 and 8, which is above a 50% win rate. This is a deck that has been declining in play and has definitely struggled over the last few weeks. Meowscarada in general is not a Pokemon that I think is very well positioned right now. Too many non-EX attackers that are quite good. Magnezone is still seeing a little bit of play, but just tons of Silvally. Meowscarada literally hits Silvally for 60 HP. They run Giant Cape. Sometimes they play Pokemon Center Lady. So it's sort of like, you know, kind of a useless card against most of the format. There's also those Celesteelas in the Buzzwole decks, which can just soak up damage. It's realistically not something that I would consider playing right now. Tons of fire still in the format, so yeah, Meowscarada is just quite not good. It's just not a great selection. The 12th most played deck so far, excuse me, of this format. A 45% win rate does kind of tell me everything I need to know. Hardly saw any play, even though it did do fairly well in the couple of people that played it this past weekend. It's just not something that I would really consider, in the metagame. I'm going to put it right here in the C tier as well. I'm going to put it like right behind Garchomp, maybe even behind Stoutland. I'll just put it like right here. It's okay. It's just okay. It's really not well positioned at all. Still too much fire, and it's just not nearly as good as the Buzzwole, Ultra Beast Grass decks. So it's going to go right there into the C tier, mainly just because Meowscarada is not very good. So I can't really justify, like anything higher than like a C tier choice. In fact, like we're being pretty generous. Like a lot of these C tier decks could just go into the D tier, but again, we're going to be a little bit more selective about the decks that we put in the S tier and the D tier. Those are very tops and very, very bottoms. So everything's probably going to fall more so in the middle there. But anyway, Meowscarada, kind of just a C tier deck, honestly, pretty bad. It's not winning anything anytime soon is kind of what I'm getting at. Next up, we've got Gallade and Stoutland. So, Gallade Stoutland is a deck. In fact, I think it's actually a bit better than a lot of other decks in the game, and I actually think it's better than Rampardos and Gallade. So, there is some inherent synergies here. It is a bit awkward. It's inconsistent. Of course, still 2 stage 2 Pokemon, but at least this way we're not always leading off with the Ralts and the Curlias. Like, we can at least lead off with like the Lillipup and then maybe get a rare candy into a Stoutland. This deck can win. It can win games. It's not terrible. There is some decent synergy here. I think that the deck is just inherently inconsistent and just in general not super strong. Still a decent amount of Giratina in the format, which Gallade gets absolutely bodied by. Stoutland doesn't do that much damage, so against Buzzwole decks with like the Giant or Leaf Capes and Ericas, all of the healing in here, these stage 2 decks are playing Lele. Stoutland just ends up being a Pokemon that doesn't do enough for you. And again, a lot of these Charizard decks are playing Silvally as well, so you're just going to get outpaced by a Silvally. Solgaleo just sets up 2 Solgaleos, and you're not going to be able to deal with 2 of them. Even if they have to attack for 3 energies, it's just not going to go well for you. So this is a deck that can kind of win sometimes, but it's really not a great deck. I think it also kind of goes right here into the C tier. I'm going to put it right next to Stoutland and Tapu Lele. I think these are 2 like kind of meme decks. I think Stoutland is just in general kind of a meme Pokemon, but I guess it's not super terrible. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and just sort of put it right there. In fact, 18 people did play Gallade in the Ursa Days tournament this past weekend. It did struggle. It had about a 45% win rate with 18 people, but yeah, I mean it's upgraded. It's not D tier at least, so it'll kind of chill there, right there into the into the what am I talking about? Into the C tier. Okay. We've got Giratina and Tapu Lele. So this is something that I probably should have just removed from the tier list because this is not something that people are really playing anymore. This is definitely sort of a legacy deck. Most people were playing Giratina and Tapu Lele with Greninja. That was kind of the core archetype of last format. A very, very strong deck, but nobody's really playing it anymore. Again, I would say this archetype has really been kind of like split into 2. Like some people are playing it with Stoutland now instead of Greninja, or some people are playing this instead of Tapu Lele, they're playing Greninja with Giratina and Oricorio, like we're seeing up here. This is a deck that people just honestly aren't playing anymore. I don't even know if I can rank this deck because it just isn't seeing play. It's not a deck list that people are using anymore, which is kind of interesting because it was definitely one of the top decks of the previous formats, but for all of the same reasons that this other Tapu Lele deck isn't good, mainly just because Tapu Lele gets absolutely bodied by Silvally, and Giratina, even with Psychic Energies, is decent. It's just not something that I think, you should really consider playing. So yeah, I mean, this is something that probably should have been left off the tier list, but we're just going to put it like right here at the bottom of C tier because we don't even have any data. People aren't playing it. I'm sure it's like okay, but just because nobody's playing it, I can't really like give it a rank. So we're going to just put it into the C tier. I don't even know what to say about it. Like I said, should have been left off the tier list this week, but we forgot to get rid of the image, so there it is. I don't really have anything to say about it. I don't even know if I can pull up a deck list about it. So, in fact, I might just edit out this part of the video. We're not even going to rank it. We're just going to keep it down here because nobody's playing it. So I don't even know if I could pull up a list as an example. So we're not even gonna rank it. Anyway, let's move it all the way to the bottom here. All right, next up, we've got Guzzlord and Naganadel. Let's do both of the Guzzlord decks. There are a couple, so Guzzlord is kind of a nice surprise in the format right now. There's a few different Guzzlord decks that are seeing play. Guzzlord is kind of the 8th most played deck, and then with Naganadel, it's the 19th most played deck of the format, so I think both of them are actually quite decent. They both have about a 52 to 53% win rate, which is much higher than I think a lot of people might consider it. Guzzlord's interesting because it's not something that's really caught on in terms of popularity, but the Dark-type Ultra Beast package is quite good. It's nothing to be kind of trifled with. I think it is a certainly very quality deck. I just don't know if it's something people will choose to play. Mainly because it doesn't necessarily hard counter any of the most common decks of the format, and Buzzwole is certainly really, really common. So, are we really going to choose to play Guzzlord over some of the other top decks? I think that's what people's what's going through people's minds. But when you take a look at this, the 8th most played deck of the format for Nihilego, and then the 19th most played deck for Naganadel, but both 53% win rates. We're going to do something I think very similar to what we did last week. I'm going to be putting Naganadel here into the B tier. I'm going to be putting it like high B tier. I think it's definitely a decent B tier deck, but when we play it without Naganadel and we're just playing it with Nihilego, now we have a much larger sample size. That is, of course, the 8th most played deck across this entire format with a 53% win rate, which is actually higher than a lot of the other decks that are in like A tier, which is quite interesting if we're being honest, right? So what I'm going to do here, and let's quickly take a look. So about a 51% win rate this last weekend in the Ursa Days tournament. So there is that. It's not like it's that substantial. I still think this is an A tier deck. So I'm going to be putting Guzzlord with Nihilego and not Naganadel in the A tier, but the Naganadel version we're going to be putting into the B tier. Again, it is split up into two decks because they are different and they function differently whether we're playing the 2/2 copy of Naganadel or not. I just don't think Naganadel is actually worth running in the deck list in my mind. I would just rather not play it. I still think you play, Guzzlord and Nihilego and Celesteela, and I think that's a good enough package there. You're running Poison Barb, you're doing maybe some poison damage, you're discarding energies. We're setting up a second Guzzlord, and then we're just kind of hitting with that Tyrannical Hole for 120. It's a sound deck list. It's a sound strategy, a very, very quality deck that I believe kind of belongs right here, sort of in the middle to like bottom A tier is kind of where we're going to put it. All of these A tier decks are just good, honestly. Like A and S tier really are, in my mind, the decks that are kind of like really in the metagame. B are like really fringe meta decks that I think are pretty decent, but not something I would really choose to play. So there you go. Guzzlord going into the A tier, and then the other version going into the B tier. I think they're both decent quality, but I would definitely recommend maybe not playing Naganadel, in my personal opinion. Next up, we've got Tapu Lele and Oricorio, which again saw way more play early on in the format than it ever did over the last couple of weeks. In fact, this is only the 26th most played deck of this format. Yeah, so it never really caught on is kind of what I'm getting at here. But Tapu Koko isn't bad. You can pair it with Oricorio, and then you have at least somewhat of a deck that can win games. It's just not something I would really consider to be favorable against a lot of the decks sort of in the format for sure. I believe there was one Tapu Lele deck here. If I go to the standings, we took a look at it yesterday. There was one Tapu Lele deck that got 25th place at the tournament. So we got to at least think about it like that. It did get 25th place. That's 7-2-1 record. That's not terrible. In my mind, it's got to go higher than C tier because all of the decks in C or below never really placed that high in the Ursa Days tournaments, right? So yeah, we got to at least give it somewhat of a nod, right? I mean, 25th place is 25th place. So yeah, let's put it in the B tier. Now, where in the B tier does this belong? I'm going to put it right here next to Magnezone and Oricorio because I think it's similar in terms of its overall impact of the metagame. I just don't think it's really as good as maybe the decks above it in the B tier, but I think it's pretty okay. Yeah, it's a bit unfortunate. I think that the Electro-type package is quite good, but unfortunately, like the best way to play Oricorio and to play the Electro-type cards is just kind of with Silvally. Like Silvally is just better than most of the Electric package, so that's just sort of what the format ends up being. Silvally is just incredible. Like this, like we do have Electro-type. It's in the S tier, but it's actually not. It's just Silvally with Zeraora and Oricorio. So yeah, yeah, I think it's fine. I don't really have much else to say about it. The 25th place is pretty good though for 1,000 players. So yeah, B tier. There you go. Tapu Koko and Oricorio. Yeah, it's still a deck. It's gonna go like middle to low B tier. I think is probably a pretty accurate place in which we can rank it. Shout out to all the people that play Tapu Koko and Oricorio. I love this format. I really do. I think there's just a lot of fun decks. Like everything B tier and above in my mind, you could play, you know, like these are legitimate decks. And there's quite a few of them in the format, which does kind of create a pretty decent balance. And the difference between high A tier and S tier is quite minimal as well, which is pretty cool. Okay, so next up we've got a little bit of an interesting one for sure. This is going to be Oricorio with, or not Oricorio, so this is going to be Silvally with the new Dusk main Necrozma, which is, you know, something that people played a little bit. This actually was, you know, 7 people played it at the Ursa Days tournament. I think that this deck list actually won like a non-EX tournament yesterday, which I think is really where this deck belongs. I think that this is, again, kind of a meme strategy. I know that the promo cards came out recently, so people wanted to play them. None of the, you know, promo Necrozma cards are good, I will say that. There's a reason why the Dragon-type Ultra Necrozma isn't on this list, is because it's literally not a playable Pokemon, at least in my mind. And then these promo cards, whether it's the Dusk main or the Dawn Wings, I think these are decent cards because you can use Lusamine with them, but I don't think it's very good. Again, as far as all of the Silvally decks go in the format, whether that's with Rampardos or with Zeraora or with Charizard or with, Blacephalon. I think all of those are better. So this to me is like an absolute kind of a meme deck. And I can't say anything else about it. Like, I know it saw play, but this really should not see play. The reason people played it this week was because this was a new card and it just came out and people wanted to test it. I just don't think it's good. So this is actually going to go in the D tier. This is a D tier deck. And I know some people might be disappointed about that. The promo cards are okay, but they're really not good. They might be better in the future because, of course, we do have Lucamine, and I think that, they do 100 or 110 damage, which is, again, pretty decent. I just can't. They're not good. I mean, at least this particular deck is not good. Yeah, that's all I gotta say. 7 people played it. It went 6-14. That's a 30% win rate. That's a D tier run in my mind. I know it's only been like 1 week. This is a relatively new deck, but I mean, come on, that's pretty bad. It did win a non-EX tournament, so maybe that's really where this deck belongs. It isn't in like a a special format there without EX cards. Yeah. Okay. So next up, we've got all of the Charizard decks. So we like to leave these to last. In fact, so I'm gonna put these 2 Giratina decks. Actually, just one, because we're not ranking this one. This is going to be Giratina Magnezone. So this is, I would say, the one deck from like last format that at least some people are still choosing to play. I don't think people are playing this deck a lot, and I think that's probably for good reason. I don't think this deck's good. Again, you're playing Tapu Lele, you're playing Psychic Energies, you're playing Giratina, but Tapu Lele and Magnezone are both Pokemon that aren't necessarily phenomenal in the format right now. So you are just a little bit reliant on Giratina. And if Tapu Lele is your leadoff Pokemon, you're going to get bodied by a Silvally. In fact, you're probably also just going to die to a Silvally if Giratina is in the active spot. You could get lucky if Magnezone gets set up really early, but come on now. This is not a deck list that I think is very well positioned in the format. I think you get absolutely farmed by Buzzwole, by Solgaleo, by a variety of other decks. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to put this right here in the C tier. I don't know exactly where. I don't really know if it matters where we put this in the C tier. I'm just going to put it like right here next to Gengar, I guess. I don't know, actually. We'll put it up here. We'll put it ahead of Stoutland. It is certainly just kind of a remnant of the previous format, where a lot of the decks of last format, unfortunately, just aren't very good in this current format. So it's got to go right here into the C tier. So yeah, Giratina Magnezone. Declining in play, declining in win rate, just honestly something that might move off the tier list in the upcoming weeks. Yeah, it's unfortunate to see. It's crazy how basically every deck in the tier list here is like new decks, right? I mean, that's how strong a lot of the cards from this new expansion ended up being, right? All of the Ultra Beasts are just incredible. Solgaleo got an upgrade, so this is technically a new deck. I mean, Giratina Darkrai is still around, Dark Arceus is still around, but these are kind of the only 2 archetypes in my mind that are still actually in the metagame from the previous meta, and everything else is honestly just new cards, which is kind of crazy to think about because a lot of people kind of really thought that ED Crisis wasn't going to be a good set or the cards weren't good. Turns out they're really good. In fact, they're all the best cards in the game, which is kind of funny. But anyway, let's dive right into the Charizard decks to finish off our tier list today. Charizard and Silvally will leave to last. I think people are probably more interested in hearing about it. First up, let's talk about Charizard and Turtonator, which is definitely something that I think people should not be playing. Now, you are playing Charizard and you are playing Turtonator, of course, both of which are definitely luck-based, sort of high-roll cards. Turtonator is not terrible if you get that, going first Kiawe on your first turn. It's probably okay, but Silvally is living an attack from Turtonator. So, in my mind, Silvally is just by far the better lead, even though it is a Stage 1 Pokemon and not a basic Pokemon, but it's still a 2-card combo because Turtonator requires Kiawe, so I think it's okay. And then, of course, you are playing Charizard, so any deck playing Charizard, 2 copies of it in Rare Candy has the potential to win because you can just turn 2 Stoke. So, I mean, it means that this deck list isn't a D-tier deck. I don't think any of the Charizard decks can be D-tier decks. In fact, I mean, I say that, but, some of them might be getting kind of close. We're going to put Turtonator here into the C tier. I'm going to put it like mid-C tier. In fact, I'll put it right above the Stoutland decks, which honestly is kind of a bit generous, I'll be honest with you. It didn't see a lot of play. It did have a 45% win rate at the Ursa Days tournament this weekend. 9 people played it. So yeah, I think like middle to low C tier is probably correct for Charizard and Turtonator. Next up, we've got Charizard and Incineroar, which is kind of crazy because only 12 people played it at the Ursa Days tournament, which is a very, very sharp decline, to be fair, than what we've seen in like the last 2 or 3 weeks and even into last format. really is a deck that struggles against Oricorio. It's probably not going to do well against a lot of the decks in the format, and just inherently a bit inconsistent, especially in a format right now where Silvally is everywhere and it's super fast-paced and super consistent. If we're playing Charizard, we're kind of forced to play Silvally, or else Charizard is just a bit underwhelming. 12 people playing this deck last weekend, and it went 17-33, which, if my math is correct, which it doesn't really matter because the Limitless tells me, is a 34% win rate, which is, again, amongst the lowest out of basically every single deck that, saw more play than it, which is crazy. So, yeah, I mean, I could just be, I could go full meme here and put Charizard and Incineroar in the D tier, but I know it's not a D tier deck. That's a small sample size, so, again, I don't think it's great. I do think that it's actually still better than Turtonator, but I think it just had kind of a bad showing. I believe it did get, like, top 8 last weekend, so I think it's an okay deck. Is it a B tier deck? That's kind of what I'm curious about. I think it probably is a B tier deck, like a low B tier deck in my mind. I do think it's better than Turtonator, even though its performance this last weekend was pretty terrible. I'm going to put it right here at the bottom of D tier, or not D tier, of B tier. Maybe actually above Decidueye, is kind of just because it probably wins that head-to-head matchup. We'll put it right here, kind of like low B tier, not at the very bottom, but low B tier. Again, not a very, very good deck. It inherently is inconsistent. It's going to struggle in a lot of different ways. And I just think that there's a better way to play Charizard, which is going to be with Silvally. Now, yes, Charizard Silvally did win this weekend's Ursa Days tournament, but as we've seen, the decks that win the tournaments don't go into the S tier very often. The reason Charizard and Silvally won, and I talked about this yesterday in our meta video, mainly was because it ended up hitting a bunch of Buzzwole and Solgaleo decks, which were the most common decks in day 2, but it struggled throughout really all of day 1. In fact, Charizard and Silvally, being the 6th most played deck of the tournament with 51 people playing it, had a 46.5% win rate. So it actually had quite a low win rate compared to basically all of the other decks in the format. And if we were kind of justifying it based off of that, we could say, all right, then this is like a B tier deck. But, the data, even though the full metadata for the tournament doesn't tell the whole story, this is certainly a counter meta deck. So if you're in high Master Ball rank, or even if you're just in like a middle to low Master Ball rank, you're probably going to be seeing a lot of Buzzwole and a lot of Solgaleo. Of course, that is where Charizard shines, even though it is going to be inherently a bit inconsistent and it's going to struggle against a lot of other decks of the format. I think it is a really strong counter meta choice. And to me, it's kind of poetry that it got first place at Ursa Days, because that's really what this deck is all about, is very kind of directly countering some of the really strong decks of the format. But again, we're looking at things holistically from an entire view, and from a sky-high view, right, a bird's-eye view, looking down on the format. We can't really call this like a top deck of the format, but it is certainly, in my mind, an A-tier choice, mainly just because of how strong it is as a counter meta play. Now, where are we going to put Charizard and Silvally in the A tier? Again, it did get first place this weekend at the 1,000 player Ursa Days tournament, but it only had a 46% total win rate. Nothing new from Charizard. It always is a deck that is a high roll deck. It's inconsistent. It's not going to have a great average high win rate, which, is more of a data that kind of I would translate towards playing in ranked battles. So this, I don't know if this is necessarily a choice I would play to really farm or grind and go up in rank in ranked battles. But if I'm already a really high rank and we're seeing a bunch of decks that are, of course, really weak to Charizard, then it's going to be a really strong choice. So we're going to go ahead and put it, now that I'm looking at this, though, we don't actually have Blacephalon on this tier list. I don't know where it went. We don't have Blacephalon and Silvally. I don't know why. It should be on this tier list, but it's just not. Now that I think about it. Okay, anyway, Charizard and Silvally I think is an A tier deck, but I think it's low A tier. I'm going to be putting it right here. Yeah, I'm actually going to put it right here above Dark Arceus and Guzzlord, because it is still seeing a lot of play, and I think it is a really strong counter meta choice. I'm going to put it right here, which I guess puts it at like the 6th best deck of the format. We could technically put it above Buzzwole. That would be kind of a spicy pick. I mean, it did get first place, guys. It did get first place. Let's go ahead and do it. Let's put it as the 5th best deck of the format. Even though it's the 6th most played deck, we're going to put it right here, right in the middle of A tier, behind Solgaleo, behind Giratina Darkrai, behind Turbo Electric type Silvally, and behind Buzzwole and Kartana. Again, really all of the decks in the A tier are really, really good. I would not be surprised to see any of these decks win an Ursa Days tournament. However, to me, Charizard definitely isn't like an S tier deck, but it is an S tier meta call, especially given the day 2 meta that we saw at Ursa Days this past weekend. So yeah, there it is, guys. There's the tier list. Like I said, for whatever reason, Silvally and Blacephalon is absent from the tier list this week. If I had to rank it, I would probably put it like a high B tier, maybe low A tier, but it's not on the tier list, so of course we're not going to rank it. But yeah, Blacephalon and Silvally, I'm going to be putting probably probably high B tier, low A tier is probably where I would put it. Probably more closely to B tier is probably where I'm thinking with Silvally and Blacephalon. Again, another strong counter meta choice. It's a bit more consistent than Charizard, but is not necessarily as like high potential as Charizard. So anyway, yeah, I know I don't have it on the screen here. I don't have it on the tier list, but yeah. There you go. So there is our tier list this week. 2 weeks into the ED Crisis metagame, and this is the tier list that I've got kind of formulated for you guys here. So, like I said, S tier. These are, in my mind, are the best decks of the game. If I had to play 2 decks, these would be the 2 choices that I have right now. The reason Silvally is up here is because I think it's massively underrated. This is my spicy take for the week. But I think if you take a look at its matchup spreads across the format and how consistent of a deck this is, I think this deck is absolutely phenomenal. In my mind, it's got to go S tier because it really is super, super good. Again, 4th at the Ursa Days tournament. Kartana Buzzwole, in my mind, the best deck of the game. It did get 3rd at Ursa Days for sure. Giratina Darkrai, Solgaleo, Charizard, Silvally, Buzzwole, Pheromosa, Dark Arceus, and Guzzlord. All really, really strong decks that I think could certainly win a tournament. In fact, the last 2 winners here, Giratina Darkrai and Charizard, right? I mean, here they are. They're in the A tier. So even though they won the tournaments, it doesn't necessarily mean they're the best decks. Certainly really strong. That's why these decks are in A tier, is because they are really strong. The difference between A and S tier is quite minimal for sure. B tier. These are decks that I think are definitely on like the lower end of the spectrum. I would be surprised to see these decks win in tournament, but I think that they're all decent to okay choices. C tier. These are decks that I really would recommend that you not play. I think they inherently struggle. They're either inherently inconsistent, not strong enough, or just not well positioned enough in the format. They're on the tier list because people are still playing them to some degree. And then here in the D tier, we've got Gallade and Rampardos, and then Silvally and Dusk Necrozma. These are kind of meme decks that you probably, they probably won't be on the tier list next week. I don't think they really deserve to see play. Really, really bad. So I would choose not to play them. And then, yeah, this is a deck that nobody's even playing, so we didn't rank it. So there you go. There you go, guys. Here's the tier list this week. Comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. Another long video. I know back-to-back, like hour-long videos, so I do kind of apologize for that. I know some people like the long videos, but it's just tough for me to talk about so much stuff without making these videos quite long. The editing is definitely going to take a while. But anyway, peace out, guys. Have a good one. Comment down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay tuned for all of the content that we've got coming on the channel. I really, really appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you guys next time. And yeah, peace out. Bye.